We started recording.
Awesome. And just as a heads up for any participants, if this is your first session to attend, throw any questions you might have either in chat or in Q&A. And between Stephen and myself, we'll get those queued up for answering at the end of the session for some dedicated Q&A time. That'll allow us to kind of get to any questions you might have. So toss those in there at any point throughout the presentation, and we'll get to those at the end. All right, so I guess we'll jump into the presentation here. As you can see on the slides, this is a session on recruiting mentors and division of team roles or roles on a team. I'm actually going to do this. I think I did the same thing last year for doing a little bit backwards. We're going to discuss team structure a bit more upfront and then get into recruiting mentors because I think that kind of naturally flows a little bit better just for discussing why do we have mentors and then how do you get mentors instead of getting mentors and then discussing how they get plugged in. So we'll go ahead and get rolling here. As I guess shown on the screen, I'm Kellen Hill. I'm a mentor or a current mentor for Team Otto up in Cumming, Georgia. I think I need to update that number actually for, I think it's 15 or 16 years now for FRC experience. As you can see, I was a student on Team 1625, an FRC team up in Winnebago, Illinois. Our team name was Winnovation. So I was a team member from 2005 to 2007 on a rookie team. When we first got started, went to college, studied international business. That was kind of influenced by me being more of a participant on our strategy team when I was a student. So that kind of influenced what I went on to study for those few years I took off. I loosely participated with the team, so I wasn't fully plugged in as a mentor, but still kind of went to team events and helped out where I could. So after graduating college, I moved out to Cedar Falls, Iowa for a year as a AmeriCorps Vista member. Some of you might be familiar with that as a first position, but this was with a different nonprofit. But once I moved out to Iowa, and this I guess about me is not, I guess it's double duty in a sense. It gives you more of an idea about me as well as an idea of how mentors might come and go and where you might find them at or how they might find you. So when I moved to Cedar Falls, Iowa, I wound up using a resource on FIRST's website for find teams or events near me, where you can just plug in a zip code and it'll pull up whatever program you're interested in. If you're interested in FLL or FTC, FRC, it allows you to kind of search for teams nearby. So that's how I found the Swart Dogs in Cedar Falls, Iowa. So I participated with them as a mentor. As a note, I guess, just because I don't think I cover this later on, when I joined the Swart Dogs, they were a very well-established team. They had been around for quite a while, as indicated by their lower team number. But they had a very established team structure. They had a sponsor for John Deere and had a lot of support in that sense. And so when I joined that team, I wound up being a bit more of a puzzle piece within the full puzzle. So there wasn't a huge expectation on me as a new mentor. I could kind of learn from other mentors on the team of, all right, what are some of the best practices for being an FRC mentor? Because it can be a tricky transition moving from being a student participant on a team to being a mentor on a team. So in my case, it wound up helping that I had the 4 years off to some degree before jumping in as a mentor. But that kind of is a bit of my experience with Swart Dogs for FRC 525. After that year, I wound up getting a job down here in Georgia, importing aluminum from Malaysia. So I did that for about 6 years, but the first thing I did, so I moved down here January 2nd, I think, of 2013, and on January 4th or 5th wound up being the FRC kickoff. So that was one of the very first things I did upon moving to Georgia. And as I mentioned, for joining up with the Swart Dogs, I'd use the tool on FIRST's website. I'd again kind of done that a little bit, but I'd also searched for a couple of teams online And if anybody's familiar with Chief Delphi, I wound up searching on there for one of the teams. That's where I actually found the contact information for Rick Folia, who works at Automation Direct. He says, yeah, come on to the kickoff. I know a local team that could really use your help. And that's actually the point at which I got hooked up with Team 1746, which at the time was known as the Forsyth Alliance, and have been with them ever since 2013. So I've been with them for the 8 seasons now, and continue to participate as a mentor. So that's kind of a bit of a history about my background. And again, I hope that provides some context for where mentors might come from, where mentors might be found at. So just some insights there. But moving on. So as I mentioned, we're going to start a bit more with team structure instead of going directly at where do you find mentors at. So what's the purpose of a FIRST team? And this is where you can get the hints from what FIRST stands for Inspiration and Recognition of Science and Technology. But it's typically a system to inspire and engage students in STEM fields. So that's where obviously all the competitions kind of are focused around building a robot. But for anybody who's had some time in our FIRST programs, you quickly learn that it's about so much more than just a robot, because you're learning organizational skills, you're learning business team skills, you're learning communication skills, you're learning manufacturing skills. It's such a broad program that there's so many things you can accomplish with this program. That being said, that then leads into our next question of what are your team's goals? This is going to significantly impact how you go about structuring your team. So like I said, for all those different fields, it's hard to do everything and everything really well. So some teams, when you first get started, you might have an emphasis or a focus on a couple of those things. So like if you're just getting off the ground, you might say, all right, we're going to focus and do as best we can organizationally, just to make sure we're efficient in our team structure. From there, we're going to focus on just building a functional robot and be really good about consistency. So whenever we put our robot out there, it's going to work every time. It might not be the flashiest robot, it might not be the most high-scoring robot, but it's going to work every single time. Other teams might say, we're going to win every single competition we go to. That's going to be our team goal because we're really interested in the competitive nature of this program, which is perfectly fine. Some teams get really focused on some of the awards for Chairman's Award. So with the breadth of options, you really get a lot of choices on what's important to our team, what things are we going to focus on, what obviously the robot and certain things are more integral to that process. But you can really pick and choose what you want to focus on. So it's important to establish those team goals because that's going to kind of push how you go about structuring your team to most efficiently pursue those goals. All right, we're going to move on here. So these are some foundational questions, again, to help get the ball rolling and have that conversation started. So now jumping into then team structure for how to go about structuring your team to, again, pursue those goals. First things first, it's about doing what's right for your team and your program. As shown here, there are a lot of different ways to do it. You can learn a lot from others. This is a big thing for rookie teams, especially when you're starting out and you don't know what the expectations are, what the possibilities are. It's a really good idea to reach out and ask questions as often as you can. Talk to those with experience. Because that's really going to help inform your decisions about how you're structuring your team instead of just guessing. Guessing can get you a certain ways. If you're somebody that has some organizational experience on how to best structure a team, you might be able to get things off the ground yourself. But again, it's really helpful to learn from others that have already invented the wheel instead of trying to create your own solution. But the important thing here is that you need to figure out what's right for your team. Just because different team, the team next door is really focused on winning events, that doesn't mean that that needs to be your focus. If your students or if your team members are more interested in one specific area, I'd recommend pursuing that until you no longer feel that's what your passion or your interest is in. But it's important to have that conversation on a routine basis, just to reestablish your goals and make sure you're still making the right decisions to pursue those goals. Otherwise, I think the popular line is it's hard to know what you should be doing unless you know where you're going. So if you establish those goals, you know where your destination is and you know how to best get there. Otherwise, if you don't set those goals and you say, we're going to be the best FRC team without defining what you think the best FRC team is, you're kind of aimlessly wandering and making a lot of guesses on what you should be doing. So it's good to establish those goals and what's right for your team. Something else that's crucial for defining that team structure is what type of resources you have. And this is something that's common at at so many decision points in FIRST programs. For like building a robot, obviously you have time, material resources, but when you're building a team, you have to consider your resources as well. So you're talking about things like school support, if you have access to teachers, what kind of local industry do you have for both sponsorships, maybe mentors from that local industry, nearby universities. Just from some examples in this case is like Kennesaw State providing water jetting or metal manufacturing for teams. But those universities, if they should have technical programs or business programs, can also be a good source for, again, team support should you need mentors. A lot of those programs then attract FRC or FIRST alumni, so you can get some experienced team mentors possibly from that resource. So for defining how your team structure is going to be put together, you got to figure out what resources you have available. Moving on then, so who will be responsible for what? And this again is very specific to your team. You're going to see examples of teams like for FRC, majority of teams I think are based out of like single school systems, whereas you'll run across other teams that are either fully work around homeschool students or like the Gwinnett Geek Space hosts a team for Ignite, which winds up being a community-based team. So that winds up being a huge part of this process is what resources do we have, whether you're school-based or not school-based. So that would dictate if you have access to teachers, or do you have access to members at that makerspace, or do you have access to mentors or professionals or team leaders from a local company, or are you just working out of a parent's garage kind of thing? Because there will be teams that have such minimal resources, but the passion is certainly there, that they'll wind up getting together in like a family's garage that has no more than a chop saw or a drill press, and are able to put together a robot in that situation. So so defining who will be responsible for what, and we haven't gotten too far into who's on the team, how to best shape the team, but you're talking about teachers, again, those industry professionals, for mentors, the parents on the team, the students obviously on the team are one of the most integral parts. But defining who's responsible for what is a big part of that process. We'll get into a little bit more on kind of who's making decisions for a team. But something I have linked at the end of this presentation, I should be able to flip my screen over so we can look at it, is an example of a team handbook for Team 1538 out in California. Where in their team handbook, they wind up defining, I guess we'll go ahead and jump over to that quickly here. Let me see. So this is an example of a team handbook, which is a very important piece of documentation. Not every team has one. It's not a necessity, but it can be very important in establishing the expectations for your team. And by putting it in writing, you can point other people in that direction. Again, you don't have to explain it every single time you onboard a new mentor, a new student, or bring a new parent on board. Instead, you can say, all right, here's our team handbook, give it a read through, ask us if you have any questions. I don't think you can see my cursor, but if you can, for where I've highlighted here, you can see they have a section explicitly about team structure that then covers what their mentors, directors, managers. So they define who's playing what role and who's kind of making what decisions. You get into 10 team leaders, what the expectations are for team leaders. There's a whole then section on mentors for explaining different types of mentors. So by defining all of these things, and we'll scroll down here just to check it out a bit. So back to the earlier point, this team goes as far as publishing their team goals. So they talk about big picture ideas. So by establishing these goals, and I won't go more over them in full detail here, but by establishing those goals, it again shows your intent and your direction that your team's going in. So moving on, we have then team structure. So you have then 5 levels, and again, this is entirely specific to your team. You can again use other teams for an example on how you want to structure your team. But again, you should do what's right for your team, the amount of students you have, the amount of mentors you have, the amount of resources you have. So make sure you're focusing on what's right for your team. So you can kind of see their tiered system for then mentors, student leadership, project lead, and then any of the other student participants. They go as far as showing all of their team mentors for what level of experience they have, how long they've been with the team, what their primary area of focus is, if they're a business team mentor or mechanical team mentor. They then go on to define what the team director's positions wind up being. Let's see, and I'll let you read further into this. I have it linked at the end of my presentation, so you can go further through this document, but it kind of, again, defines that team structure on, all right, here's who our mentors are and what their responsibilities are. Here are student positions and what their responsibilities are. Here are our team goals. So by putting it in writing, you get a lot of that detail down on paper, and it helps that continuity flow. Again, you're not creating the wheel every single year by having the same conversation over and over again. It's good to have it come back to that topic and discuss it just to make sure your team's running down the right path. But again, it's helpful to have that resource established and in place, that it's kind of, again, a living document that you can update as you go on and make sure you're still moving in the right direction. We'll get back to presentation mode here. All right, so again, I have that linked at the end of the presentation. I'd recommend checking it out. If you do simply Google like FRC Team Handbook, you'll find a lot of other examples. Team 1538 was one that was kind of has done very well, both competitively, organizationally, but they're kind of a tried and true FRC team that puts together some really good resources. So I'd use them as an example. But yeah, so that's team structure. Well, skipping around here. So a bit more on team structure then for examples. So as you can see from the Holy Cows or the Team 1538 handbook, they kind of have then mentors up at the top of that organizational chart. And that gets us into our topic here on the spectrum of what team structure might look like. And I know there's some people are a bit more picky on this subject than others for having the students lead kind of in whatever direction they want to go into, whereas in other situations, the mentors are kind of calling a few more of the shots. But I think the important thing here is balance, and again, doing what's right for your team and what resources your team has available. One comment I guess I'd like to make is that first programs are so much, there's so much learning to take place. And part of that learning can be learning how to teach or learning how to mentor. But for the large part, I recommend that students on FRC teams more so focus on learning the content. It's great to get exposed to those leadership roles, and helping other team members how to lead. But again, back to my earlier comment for kind of leaning for like rookie teams learning from experienced teams, is there's so much to be learned from people that already have the experience. And that's where I think mentors kind of can play a very important role. I'm not saying they're crucial or you have to have them by any means, but by learning from somebody that already has a skill set or has already picked up that lesson and has learned it the hard way, it's good to be able to learn from somebody who's already made those mistakes instead of having to make all of those mistakes yourself and learn from firsthand experience. I think firsthand experience can be crucial in developing a skill set. And I recommend mentors figure out how to allow students to fail in small ways so they can learn from that firsthand experience. But for the large part, you can, instead of allowing, so say you've been working on a mechanism for a week and it's kind of floundering a bit, and the student's really passionate about getting it to a point where it'll work, but the mentors had some experience with that particular mechanism in the past. You can sit down and have a discussion about what the weak points of that design might be, how much time it might take to I guess complete that mechanism if it's feasible within your time limit. So by having that input from what typically winds up being a professional presence or an industrial professional, from somebody who's out in the field, you can garner a lot from that experience instead of, again, making every single mistake firsthand. So that's where I'm a big fan of mentor participation. Again, it's not crucial, but it helps substantially to kind of learn some lessons a little bit more easily, instead of making it, again, all of them firsthand. So we'll move on here then. Focus on a sustainable program. This is a big part, and this really should be one of your established in your team goals. Just making sure whatever you are doing, do it so it's sustainable, or that it's a program that can continue on for then others to benefit from, whether you're a participant on that program in future years or not. And I think this, I don't know if this happens more for FTC or FLL programs, is that they wind up being a bit family based, that once your student kind of graduates, the team then dissipates and other teams will kind of pop up. But so I don't know if it's more, I guess the teams that are more school-based should really focus on creating sustainability for their program. And that's where you're talking about how or who you're depending on for the team to function. So you're talking about then teachers, how much teacher turnover are you going to have? Or if you're the teacher, how long are you going to be at the school? Talking from a bit of experience for working with the team at Forsyth Central High School. Since I've shown up in 2013, I think we've had 5 or 6 different engineering teachers to work with over those 8 or 9 years. So we've really had to do a lot of the heavy lifting as mentors to make sure that team continues and that it's not falling apart every single year. So we've been lucky enough to have kind of a foundation as a mentor group and as a student group to continue on a sustainable path. I guess and an important thing to focus on there is then the amount of the students you have on your team. There's a 4-year turnover typically for those students, so you can kind of lean on them for 4 years as they learn and develop and grow as a student, as a leader on your team. But typically they're then going off to university and focusing on what's next for them. That a lot of that sustainability for your program comes from those teachers and those mentors. There's a lot you can do with that student knowledge set for training, making sure that seniors are training like freshman members, just for passing on that ingrained knowledge again, so those freshman members don't have to learn everything firsthand. So that's a huge part of that sustainability, is making sure you're passing on that ingrained knowledge. Something I've been talking about with a few people recently, and we've been talking about on FRC 1746, is making sure we have thorough training documents in place, not only for like written procedures on how we might crimp wires or pick what motor controller we're using for what motor, just for there being an explicit guide. So if somebody has a question of, hey, what motor controller are we using here? You can go to reference a document to say, all right, this is how we do it. So having that kind of documentation in place, having that ingrained knowledge in such an accessible place, really allows for a sustainability of your program. So the more of those resources you can develop, the better. And again, I'll keep saying it, is make sure you kind of search for those resources a little bit to take cues from other teams. But again, make sure they fit for your team's needs. But yeah, I think I talked a little bit about who can you depend on being there, whether it's the teachers or the makerspace participants that are leading your FRC team, or the mentors on the team, or in FTC's case, like what students are going to be on the team and how long is it going to last, just to make sure it's a program that's going to keep moving. So yeah, those are some very important things to consider then for team structure. Back a little bit on the student mentor spectrum, who's leading the team. I think a lot of that is sitting down and being able to participate on the team as team members alike. So I wouldn't draw it up as a picture where the mentors are leading every single conversation. It's about sitting down as a group, figuring out what's right for your team that all of you are team members of, and pursuing that direction. So mentors aren't right just because they're mentors. Teachers aren't right just because they're teachers. Make sure you're having those arguments and pursuing the right things for the right reasons. So that I heavily encourage a balance of the two. Again, that depends on your resources and if mentors are even an available resource to you. We'll talk a little bit here on where you might find mentors and where they might come from. So that'll kind of influence on if you're interested in having more mentors on your team. That I'll give you some ideas on where you might be able to find them. But all right, so moving on here. All right, so mentors. What is a mentor? It can be pretty broad, and I guess for cross-program purposes, it can be an FRC student mentoring an FTC program or an FLL program. That it can be as basic as that, for a student helping out another student, kind of pointing them in the right direction. It can be, it essentially is just somebody who's there for the purposes of sharing that accumulated knowledge from their experience, and how can they share it with you and your team, so that you might be able to better perform your team's goal or functions and pursue your team's goals. So a mentor is just somebody who has an established skill set that's coming in to share it with your team in a capacity to allow you to better perform your functions. So where do they come from? Again, this is pretty broad. It can be from first teams in your area. They might help mentor you. They can be teachers at your school. They can be the parents of team members. A lot of times, with again, as broad and diverse as the needs are for FRC teams, you can have a parent that's good at project management, and that can be applied for any and every function on a team. Otherwise, you might have somebody that's a programmer as a team parent, that can come in and help you best structure your team's code. Otherwise, they might be from a local industry. If you have a team sponsor, you can ask them, hey, do you have anybody that would be interested in mentoring our team to help us out with better developing these skill sets for learning like welding or programming or CAD or, again, business skills, presentation skills, communication skills. So they can come from quite a few different places. Team alumni are also one place. Other teams' alumni are another place. We'll kind of get into that for Team Otto's purposes. I think I've discussed a bit about what they do. They're really there to share their knowledge, and some of them participate. And again, this is, I guess, a thing more as a team alumni. But I guess it applies to any mentor. A lot of them are there because they find that building a robot is just as interesting as you do. So they're there to kind of scratch an itch and like solve problems, but they're most often there to solve it as part of a team and not simply just show up and perform that function by themselves. So they're there and are interested in performing as part of that process. How do you keep them coming back? Or I guess, how do you find them is the next one. But again, local industry, team parents, that kind of thing. So if you're looking for mentors, those are the ways I'd recommend. I think one of the resources I linked, I've yet to use it much myself, but there's a new thing called the First Mentor Network. But I believe teams are able to post saying, hey, we're interested in having more mentors. So if teams go on that site and are looking to get linked up to teams, those mentors can then get plugged in with teams that are actively looking for mentors. So I guess that goes both for mentors and teams looking for mentors. How do you keep them coming back? Again, for what I was saying, a lot of mentors are showing up because they have an explicit interest in building robots and a lot of the same skill sets that the students are there for. So if you can actively scratch that creative itch on their part, any mentor is going to have different purposes for showing up, and that can include things like they have an explicit interest in teaching students new skills. They might be interested in just designing things, but they can take students along with them while they're designing those things to help students pick up that skill set so the student can design it the next time around. So by kind of helping them scratch that creative itch, that can really help them keep coming back. Something that we do on Team Otto is our booster club. Team Booster Club kind of arranges meal plans, but we have built-in costs then to cover mentors' meal plans. They also get then team shirts that they get then. So part of our fundraising then goes to cover those things, just to allow mentors to more easily participate. At Team Otto, we kind of do a few meetings a week, but have them be longer. So if a mentor is interested in participating, they get off at 5 p.m., but your team meetings only go till 5 p.m., it's hard for them to participate. So if you have your meeting go a little bit later in the evening, it might allow them to come right after work so they can get plugged in. So accessibility is a big thing there for mentors to be able to get plugged in. Is there such a thing as too many or too few mentors? The answer is no, I guess, on both ends of that spectrum. But it's as long as you're structuring your team properly, so for those mentors to be productively involved and not kind of running over what students' interests are. You have to be very explicit about what the expectations are for mentors, just to make sure they're not there just for themselves and building a robot for themselves. And same thing goes, I guess, for too few. Teams can function in any kind of capacity as long as you have the desire to. But again, I think it's helpful to have mentors, but again, you can definitely function without. All right, moving on here. So how do mentors factor into team structure? And again, this goes back to how much can you depend on them? Are they going to consistently show up? Are they only showing up once a month to help out? Are they showing up a few times a week to help out? So you kind of got to factor that availability in. You got to factor in their skill set of are they only available online to help out? And if so, do your students know how to best communicate with them to get their input? So those kind of things help factor in how your mentors are involved. Another is like if you're heavily dependent on college students for leading your team, again, you're going to have that 4-year turnover that likely when they graduate from college, they may very well be moving on somewhere else, which is something we have with Team Otto. We have a handful of Georgia Tech student mentors, but usually they'll graduate and kind of move off to a different location. So it's hard to depend on them as mentors for continuity's purposes. So make sure you're factoring those things in when deciding how mentors work into your team structure. Teaching new mentors the ropes. This is actually pretty similar to, depending on where the mentor comes from, it's remarkably similar to teaching a new student how to be involved on the team. Obviously, the mentor is coming in with an established skill set, but your new students may very well come in with the similar case that they may have programmed before, so they already know some of the ropes, but you really have to teach them how FIRST programs work, how the competition season works, how to function as part of a team. Usually they have somewhat of a skill set on that front, but sometimes you have to kind of show them the ropes on, all right, you're here to function as part of this team, and part of that expectation is that you're passing on some of your knowledge to the students and other team members that are here. So making sure that you're showing them the ropes the right way in that sense. And again, a document I've linked at the end is the FIRST mentor guide that I think helps those new mentors get familiar with the program and how teams might function. So again, I've linked that at the end. That kind of gets into a bit about how to address team issues with mentors. And again, this is the importance of having that team handbook written down, is that, all right, here's the expectations for you as a mentor. And if you're not following these, we're going to have a sit down and discuss how you might better perform your functions, or if we're the right fit for you as a team, or if there's a team that might better fit your interests, to have those discussions. Another important one here, should team alumni be mentors? We actually have a policy on Team Otto that team alumni need to take, we recommend taking a couple years off and participating then as a volunteer, figuring out a lot of team alumni are then going on to study at college, or but it's good to have some separation there to better function, figure out what your personal interests are, instead of continuing as it can be difficult to have that mental separation of participating as a mentor or a student to then jumping to being a mentor the following year. So it's good to have some separation there. We love seeing our team alumni show up at events to kind of support the team, but otherwise we heavily emphasize that they take a couple of years off to be able to focus on their personal needs and their personal goals as an individual instead of as a team member. We love to see them come back out after those couple of years, but that's at least our policy on Otto. So a bit more about Team Otto, or the mentors on our team, just for a case study, I suppose. We had about 13-ish total mentors for the 2020 season. That can fluctuate, and again, some of those mentors are showing up every single meeting, whereas others show up once every couple weeks to kind of help out. 4 of those are actually team alumni for having come back to help out. I think we have 8 total FRC alumni, so a handful of those are then from different teams, both in the area and from outside the area. Like I said, I'm from Illinois and haven't moved down here, getting plugged in. And this is kind of an idea of where you might get team mentors from. But again, we have a couple parents for current students that we get plugged in, and a lot of that is whenever you're doing introductory meetings for the team, or getting new student members signed up for the team. A lot of it saying, hey, here are all these opportunities we have for you to help out as a parent. If you're interested, start showing up and we can get you plugged in. But unless you say you need help, rarely is it the case where somebody's actually going to show up and say, hey, I'm here to help. So make sure you're making it a known need for your team, or a known interest that your team is looking for mentors for those parents. We then have a couple parents of former team members that keep hanging out just because they enjoy it so much. And then we have a couple people that are not alumni or team parents, but then got dragged in by, I think, a couple of our alumni down at Georgia Tech would wind up talking to their friends about it and pull them in. So we've actually gained some sponsors that way. So it make sure you're looking anywhere and everywhere for those mentors or new participants on your team, because there can be a lot of benefits to it. All right, so moving on. So for our team structure, we have 3 teachers at the school that kind of rotate. We have one of them is the main FRC teacher for Anupam Goli, if anybody's met him. But we have a couple other teachers that can allow to kind of relieve the burden on him to be able to come in and check out, or either travel along with the team for events just to kind of relieve the burden on a single teacher. So that's very helpful. So it's nice to have that school support. Typically, we're looking at 20 or 30 students. I guess our structure is somewhat similar to what I linked in the Holy Cows Handbook, that we'll have an engineering lead, a business team lead for those students, and then a handful of sub-team leads and project leads amongst that group. Again, we have approximately 13 mentors for varying fields, for programming or CAD or design or business team. That booster club is a huge part of our team for those parents showing up. And again, that's a big part of that expected need. So when new students sign up, we're telling them, like, hey, there's an expectation that you help out here and there if you're bringing a team meal, or if you're driving students to and from competitions, or that kind of thing. So the booster club is a huge part of our program and really helps us function as well as we do. Who is in charge? This is where generally we function, again, as a team, making those decisions as a team, figuring out what's best for us. If it comes down to it in certain situations, obviously, if a decision needs to be made, and you're looking at the best interest of the team, we're going to focus more heavily on the teacher, the lead mentors, the student leads, to be able to make those decisions that might be a little bit harder to make. You don't really want to focus too much on voting. That can be pretty dangerous. And this is another big part of what the team handbook might look like, is establishing, what's that structure look like, and how do we make decisions as a team? How does this change from year to year? Again, this is something that's for redefining what your team's goals are for a given year. It's good to keep the conversation rolling. Again, you want to keep that a living, breathing document, a living, breathing conversation. So make sure you're making the right decisions for your team for how that might change from year to year. This is kind of my last slide before Q&A, so I think we're close to there. So again, these are some mentor resources. One of those is PCH Mentor Roundtable, which is a Slack, which is a communication forum. But that's something I set up a few years ago just for PCH mentors. That winds up being a good way to communicate with other team mentors. So a good way to learn from others. So if you're interested in getting added to that, if you're a team mentor and you're not already there, go ahead and email me with my email shown there, and I can get you added. Some of these are other actually links that aren't blue for hyperlinks, but you can click on them. For this presentation will likely be posted with the video recording. But there's the First Mentor Guide, again, for helpful for those new mentors getting plugged in. First Mentor Network, which is helpful for getting finding teams or finding mentors. So that's a good resource to look into there. And then I had gone ahead and linked that team handbook that I referenced earlier, just for an example of how a team might be structured, and listing some team goals and some of those expectations. So some good resources there. I'm sure there are plenty of others out there if you search online, but those wind up being some helpful ones from my point of view. And then, all right, we got questions here. So if you have any questions, feel free to sling them our way. But happy to answer any you might have. I think we're here. I guess the next sessions are starting at 11, so we'll have 13 minutes here or so for answering any questions you might have. I see a comment here from Alexander Kua. It's hard enough to recruit mentors, let alone mentors. Some mentors have difficulty working long hours for free, especially at this time of year. Yeah, and that's where my presentation, I guess, was written, or I'd given this presentation last year. So I guess factoring in like the COVID situation, obviously it's a unique time to be able to kind of find new mentors. So you might be looking for mentors to be able to participate remotely, and that's where it's important to have kind of a online team communication channel that might be easier for those team mentors to get involved without them being there in person. Obviously, long hours are hard to work around. Again, that's where, again, it would be helpful for plugging them in virtually. But yeah, just seeing how flexibly you can build your meeting hours to be able to allow them to participate. But yeah, obviously, we're going through that process right now for the school you're having start up for recruiting mentors, and we're very familiar with how difficult or challenging that process can be. So I appreciate that thought. But I guess, Stephen, do you see any other questions out there? This is the
No, I do not have any questions on my end that I can see.
Okay. But yeah, I have my email there in the presentation. I guess I'll go back to the slide for having that up on the screen. But so if anybody should have any questions about how we function on Team Auto, or have any, again, questions for getting added to the mentor roundtable, or so yeah, feel free to use that Q&A. I think we'll leave it up for a few minutes here, just if anybody has any other questions. We can go ahead and get those answered.
Someone just asked if you would be able to post those links in the chat for everyone.
So that's where, unfortunately, the chat functions. I don't know. Let me see if I can. I guess there is to everyone. So yeah, let me see if I can have those links. All right, so here's the. Get out of here. No, I don't want you open. I want you closed. All right, so here's that's the mentor guide. I guess there's also that option. So here's the mentor network. That's where you can post if you're a mentor looking for a team or a team looking for mentors. And then here's the team handbook PDF link. Did those go out to? Yeah, I think those went out to everybody, right? Yeah.
I know I can at least see them on my end, so I think everyone should have seen them.
Yeah, it looks like it's posted from Callan Hill to everyone, so I think that went out.
And did you just see the latest question? Otherwise, I can read it out to you.
I think I just have chat covering up the. All right, I'm with a rookie team of 6 FTC vets. We have a strong set of resources, but we don't have much of a team structure because everyone is specialized in their skills. We haven't developed a system of accountability. Any advice on setting one up mid-season? And again, this is where I don't have much experience with FTC, but I can definitely appreciate your. I've had some exposure to like a VEX program functioning, but I think the important thing to establish there, since you're kind of all working on the same tier, and you might not have an established, like one of you might not be the team lead, that you're kind of all functioning in your given roles and working together as a team. But what I'd consider doing in that case is if you come across situations where it's hard to answer like a question, or you're not all on the same page for a given design choice, is I'd set up a decision-making guide on how those decisions get made. In your case, since you're all a student group, trying to make that decision. Voting might work best in that case to say majority is able to make the decision. Obviously, it's hard when you're kind of cross-disciplined for if it's like a mechanical team decision and you got programming team or whoever else weighing in on that decision. It can be difficult to, I guess, chime in or. But it's very important that kind of you get everybody on the same page, and that once you've made a decision, you're like, all right, we're good here. We're moving on to the next thing. So every now and then tempers will flare, but the more you can have it as a documented decision-making structure, the more of that expectation's already laid out, and it's harder for people to get frustrated about that decision-making structure. And again, that's important to have as a kind of living, breathing thing, that should somebody have a complaint about how that decision-making structure is structured, then have a discussion about how it might be improved. But yeah, otherwise I think it can be difficult as a purely student group to like have somebody carved out as explicitly the team lead, unless that's again something you'd want to put to a vote. But instead of having like an assumed team leader, or obviously like personalities will kind of factor in on, all right, who's got the most experience, who's got the personality that might cater more to leading this group. So sometimes there are assumed leadership positions, but it's best if possible for it to be an established role instead of expectations. And again, I'd look at what 1538's handbook has for those student leadership positions. But yeah, the more you can have it written down and in stone, or living, breathing, sorry, I think the better it is for people to be able to actively reference and have that expectation be set out, instead of being frustrated each and every time a decision is made because it didn't fall in your favor, but because the decision was made for the right reasons. Good question. Any other questions out there? But yeah, and again, feel free to reach out at any given time. I think these programs are fantastic. I guess as a mentor myself, and something I discussed a little bit, was just for the purpose I show up is because I'm kind of able to scratch an itch, and the students are able to learn as a result of that. So it's an excellent side effect to be able to have as a mentor, and keeps me actively engaged while also fulfilling kind of a valuable role as a mentor for kind of helping my team in the right direction, helping students learn some valuable lessons. So it's definitely a rewarding role to fill. But yeah, and as an individual, I think it's important to then figure out what's important to you. Don't feel too much of a burden to continue participating because your team needs you. If that's the case and you don't have the time to be able to contribute to a team, see if you can help them or point them in the direction of those that might be able to help them out. But don't do something that's unhealthy for you just because you feel like you have to. So yeah, make sure you're participating in a situation that's good for you and good for others. But, all right, well, I guess if there aren't any other questions, I guess we'll go ahead and get wrapped up. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of the symposium and any of the other presentations out there. Again, they'll be recorded, so go back and check them out afterwards for sharing with others that might not have been able to make it. But glad you could make it out today, and again, enjoy the rest of the symposium.